What's up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on Fight TV. I'm your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino, a few days removed from Crown Jewel on official election day. I have some sort of cold or flu coming on that is going to probably make me sound like Willie Nelson. There's plenty of things to get to, and so this should be a very fun show here on The Voice of Wrestling. But Nick, what's going on over there? Have you look? Today is election day, and I want to start off, not going too political or anything.
Sure.
I am, after we get done recording, because of course this is recorded on Tuesdays, I will be getting out to cast my vote, and I know it's on the ballot. It was a controversial decision as far as this particular vote, but I am 100% after yesterday. I've made up my mind. I am 100% voting to have Jason Garrett removed as Cowboys head coach. That I am casting 100% on that side. And I know that's going to piss some people off. But that is where I'm headed tomorrow, or headed today.
I hear you.
That's my policy issue.
I'm heading to the polls right after this too. And these things, I've been watching the news. These ballots are ridiculous this year.
They are
like 2 pages. There's like front side, back side. You got to flip it over. There's an essay portion of the ballot.
Yeah.
I actually did 2 weeks of Kaplan test prep just to get myself ready for these ballots. And what I'm going to do is, I 100% am voting to have Matthew Stafford removed as the quarterback of the Detroit Lions. And I think what we need to do is just swap. I think Stafford needs to coach the Cowboys. And I think Jason Garrett needs to be the quarterback for the Lions. I think both of them will do a hell of a lot better job.
That's a good point.
In those roles than in their current
roles.
That's
a good point.
Think, hey, man, I'm New York. You're down south, but I think we see eye to eye on our politics.
I think so too, and I think right underneath that section, there's a section here in Arkansas about marijuana use or something being legalized, and I'm going to check the box 100% in favor of marijuana being legal, because it takes a lot of pot to be a Cowboys fan these days. I mean, I've got to get high every time I watch that game.
I don't see how anyone could vote for Kane again.
I know.
Looked weak.
Right.
Did not look like a leader in that ring.
No, he didn't.
So, it's going to be a hell of a day for us when we finish this show.
Speaking of Crown Jewel, we are going to kick it off with what we believe, at least, to be the main event coming out. A lot of people pissed off about this too, so it goes hand in hand with politics. People just angry these days, and we're going to tell you why right here on the main event. It's the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash, Nick Paglino, and Brock Lesnar. You know what? I was over at my uncle's. Everybody that knows this show knows about David, knows about Brett. If you don't know about him, I've been friends with Brett forever. We generally get together for some sort of sports, normally the Cowboys, but we've both pretty much just turned our backs towards our boys this year. So we find other things where we can get together, have a few beers, normally bet on matches, and so we always take opposite picks unless it's just an obvious one. And generally, whoever loses, when we're in a really good mood and we're wanting to drink that particular pay-per-view, what we do is we have our picks, and whoever loses each match, like every single match, the loser shotguns a beer. So normally one of us is drinking anywhere from 5 to 8 shotguns on top of just normal drinking.
I'm going to have to guess you down to 12-pack after that event.
No. I was spot on with my picks, like almost down to the finals, I think, of the World Cup or whatever I was wrong on. But virtually everything else, I was really right there with. I think the pre-show I got wrong. I might have guessed Rusev or something. But other than that, I was really there. And I called Brock Lesnar. Everybody else there, David included, Brett obviously went with Braun Strowman. That seemed like the more likely pick for a number of reasons. But prior to that match, I explained my reasons why. and I'll get to those in just a minute. But Nick, I want to open the floor to you because a lot of criticism coming out of Crown Jewel specifically for that match and that result. And here we are again with a part-time, limited in appearance Universal Champion in Brock Lesnar. What did you make of the actual match itself? I mean, of course, they'd be trying to put it over as it took multiple F5s and all. I mean, just they were trying to protect Braun, you could tell. But obviously, a pretty dominant win for Brock Lesnar. And, of course, he now is the Universal Champion once again. I know a lot of fans are very upset with that. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, before I really get into my thoughts on the actual match, the latest on Brock Lesnar to sort of bring everybody up to speed on his WWE status is that, original plans for this match at Crown Jewel did, of course, call for Roman Reigns to retain the title. Now, after he vacated the title, of course, WWE is scrambling, trying to figure out new creative plans with Roman Reigns being absent. And they were able to come to terms on an agreement with Brock Lesnar that has seen him sign on for 2 more matches. Now, after Crown Jewel, we already know that he'll be facing AJ Styles in a champion versus champion match at Survivor Series. So that's one of the 2 matches that Brock Lesnar has agreed to, meaning he has 1 more match on his short-term contract. It should be very apparent knowing this. And, you just mentioned it, and we've talked about it before on the show, that when Brock Lesnar wins these titles, when we see these surprise wins or these surprise returns from Brock Lesnar, these are not full-time returns anymore.
Sure.
Brock Lesnar is now working on these short-term deals. Now, part of that is because it makes the most sense financially for Brock Lesnar, but also we have to remember that we are in a very, very this is a particularly different time with Roman Reigns having to exit WWE due to the leukemia. So there is this added layer of WWE negotiating with Brock Lesnar because of Roman Reigns' absence.
Sure.
But again, this is another short-term deal here. When Brock Lesnar will have that last match of the 2 matches is unknown right now. But I think what happens with WWE, is we see them going back to the Brock Lesnar well because we know, or WWE knows, at least they very much feel strongly that he is still a huge draw for the company. And I think with everything that's going on with him and his UFC schedule, when we saw that this weekend, and that plays a huge part of this too, with Daniel Cormier calling out Brock Lesnar once again, not only calling out Brock Lesnar, but calling out the WWE Universal Championship and saying, bring that title over to UFC because I feel like being a WWE champion as well. This really plays into WWE's hands quite well. So they see the potential here of many different things. Protecting Braun Strowman, kind of delaying that inevitable big title win for Braun Strowman, and then also continuing to ride out this question of whether or not Brock Lesnar is going to go into his UFC title fight against Daniel Cormier as the WWE Universal Champion. So as far as WWE goes, this is win-win for them all over the place. It's great business for them. They have their champion being promoted in another promotion, a big legitimate sports promotion such as UFC. So the writing is really on the wall here for WWE to at least entertain the idea of Brock Lesnar as champion through to, say, Royal Rumble. What happens after that is anybody's guess. As for the match itself, hey, man, this is what it is now. This is what it is with Brock Lesnar. It's these short matches, these sort of short, explosive matches. They have to protect Braun Strowman. The match is what it was. Did I love it? Not necessarily. There wasn't much to it. It was a bunch of F5s and the match was over. But, this is what we have come to expect from Brock Lesnar matches. And it's funny. I think if you're a WWE fan and you hate this, it is what it is. If you're a UFC fan and you hate this because you've got Daniel Cormier invoking the name of a fake WWE championship in UFC, you have to get used to the fact that it is what it is. These are long-term business decisions that are being made right now. And as a hardcore fan, as an MMA purist, you may hate it. And as a WWE purist who wants to see that fighting champion on Raw every week, you're going to hate it. But it is what it is, because at the end of the day, it's best for business on both sides. What are your thoughts on that? And then I'd like to hear your thoughts on the match itself.
Yeah, I think there's a few things at play here, and I think you're spot on with the UFC correlation. And I think that was kind of number one for me. I mean, the idea of Brock Lesnar having the championship as some of this UFC preparations kind of building up for his fight with Cormier and I think that was a part of it. However, let's also, as you mentioned earlier too, Roman Reigns and his unfortunate exit due to leukemia changed everything. If Roman's in that match, Roman is retaining the title. That's number one. That's the obvious part about this. And then, of course, where do you go from there when you leave the two other remaining competitors in the match? To me, I think it made sense. I think, I'm not going to say this is a testament on Braun Strowman, but I don't know if WWE was ready for him to be that babyface Universal Champion that he's ultimately going to be if, in fact, he wins it. I think that because of everything, the entire storyline at this point getting cut as short as it did due to Roman Reigns having to exit, I think that's where WWE then decided, if we can go to Brock Lesnar and get a couple of matches out of him, then we can kind of take a step back and allow kind of that classic traditional Wrestling 101 storyline of the babyface chasing the title. They never really got that with Braun Strowman. He's been a heel for a good portion of this time, at least recently, because they were trying to get Roman Reigns over as a babyface. And so they felt the need to put the title on Brock, in my opinion, partially because of the fact they like the idea of building Braun up a little bigger, making him have to work to win it. So it'll mean that much more if and when he does. Then you've got the UFC thing. And I can't imagine Vince McMahon or anybody associated with this decision knew ahead of time that Daniel Cormier was going to provoke Brock Lesnar and cut a promo on him in such fashion and do the best thing he could have done for Vince McMahon and WWE as far as that goes, by saying, hey, bring that title. Now, Nick, we discussed this last week, and I don't know if this is something that you brought up earlier, but the Fox News thing, the fact that we heard Fox suggested that they would like to see potentially Daniel Cormier in the announce booth for SmackDown. So you have a couple of things at play here in the sense that WWE is going to try to capitalize on Brock Lesnar and his UFC return. Daniel Cormier is obviously doing his part, which I don't know if that necessarily was expected prior to. So that was just a bonus. I mean, it was great for that, because I think it was already decided for other reasons that I mentioned to have the title put on Brock in the first place. But either way, I think it couldn't have worked out better. And as upset as people are, think about the alternative. Let's say, Nick, that Braun Strowman had won that match. Who the hell is next in line? Where would he go if he had won it? Because I just don't think WWE has those pieces in place. And then it's like a domino effect. If you rush Braun to that spot, you have to rush everybody else, whether it be a Drew McIntyre, or pick your poison that you want to see in a massive, major main event feud for the Universal title with Braun Strowman as champion. Where does it go from there? Because you're just limited right now, because everything you've been doing for the past year and a half has been centered and focused around one guy, and he just left because of cancer. It's what can you do?
It's a giant ripple effect, you know?
Exactly.
And I think, again, in the case of Braun Strowman, I mean, fans are just getting used to him as a babyface again.
Yep,
what was he? He was a heel. Now all of us, I think he's been pretty over with the fans in general. So that transition's not going to be difficult. But again, you've got, I mean, it even dawned on me on Raw last night. You're watching Kurt Angle, who is in his first match on Monday Night Raw in 12 years. And it almost sort of felt like an afterthought, because you have all of these other pieces in flux with guys like a Drew McIntyre. Right before that match, Drew McIntyre confronted Bobby Lashley, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, now you got two heels who are confronting each other. What's going on? Everything is in flux because of Roman Reigns' absence, and we're seeing that big ripple effect, and so I think, yes, exactly. Like you said, Braun might not be ready yet, just by virtue of the fact that, I don't know how the fans are, maybe they haven't built him up yet or reestablished him as that top babyface on Raw. And also, where does he go from there? So the likely default is Brock Lesnar, because at the same time as Roman Reigns is leaving WWE, Brock Lesnar is inching closer and closer to his UFC fight against Daniel Cormier, and WWE has not shied away in recent months with, Paul Heyman coming in and cutting his promos and saying, Brock Lesnar is going to re-win the title. And when he regains the title, he's taken it to UFC. They always mention UFC. They always drop the fact that he will or threaten to take the title from WWE to UFC. And then you mix in to this equation, as Brock Lesnar is getting ready to return to UFC, Daniel Cormier is getting ready to exit UFC. And so now Daniel Cormier is starting to think, well, I need to set up my future. And if my future involves WWE and any kind of a televised role in WWE, I want to start planting those seeds now, which is why we're seeing him reference WWE more in interviews lately. And he's now calling out WWE and the title on UFC programming. And so, all of these pieces, I think WWE thinks to themselves, they fit better into place long term now that Roman Reigns is gone. And as far as UFC is concerned, again, there was more fan outrage when Daniel Cormier cut the promo. Guys, UFC fans, if there are any of you MMA fans listening to this show, you better get on board and embrace the fact that UFC has been sports entertainment for a while now. You've got Conor McGregor throwing chairs through buses, no repercussions. You've got at the last Conor McGregor fight, they're jumping the octagon and brawling in the crowd, no repercussions. Brock Lesnar's appearing at the pay-per-view with Daniel Cormier and shoving him into the cage at the end. It was all of these events that have happened in UFC. They all look like the end of an episode of Raw. People need to get on board with the fact that UFC has embraced the sports entertainment aspect of its company, and it's gravitating toward that, and it's successful. They wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't making money for them, and it's making money for them. So this is an overall win-win situation for both sides of the equation. For UFC, they know, and as many, because let's look at it like this, Chris. What is one thing we know about hardcore fan bases? And this applies to UFC, MMA fans, WWE, hardcore pro wrestling and WWE fans. What is one thing we know about them when they say, that's it, I hate this, I'm never watching it again? What do we know is true?
They will watch it again.
They will watch it again next week. And UFC knows that. WWE knows that. They know that as much as the fans are going to threaten to not watch it, or, oh, Brock Lesnar's coming back to UFC, and oh my God, he's going to bring the fake WWE title. That's it. I'm never going to watch this again. Yes, they will. I always go back to that story. I've mentioned it on the show before, and it bears repeating. That first fight that Brock Lesnar ever had in UFC. I went to a bar in New York City, and it was it was you had to the line was out the door to get in. And I remember asking one of the bartenders, have you ever had a turnout like this for a UFC event? And he said never. I mean, it is absolutely bonkers in here. And so the same philosophy applied then and applies now.
Right.
People will pay to see the fake Brock Lesnar lose.
Yep.
And all of these things that happen to Brock Lesnar, he gets popped for PED use after his last fight. Everybody thought that was going to ruin his credibility. Nope. It helps, because what it does is it reinforces to all the haters, everybody who's ever hated Brock Lesnar, it reinforces that he's this fake fighter that is infringing on the real sport of UFC, and they will pay to watch him lose. So everybody makes money. You know, the only way things are going to change, and we've said this a million times and we don't need to get into it again, is if people actually stop watching. But UFC, WWE officials, they're smart. They know fans aren't going to stop watching, so they're going to keep paying, and both sides are going to continue to make money. So anybody who's looking for an explanation as to why this happened again with Brock Lesnar, there it is.
Before we wrap up this particular conversation in the main event this week, I just want to know what the timetable is, in your opinion, Nick, on how long Brock holds on to this. Because, you know, if you're Vince McMahon, I mean, we're talking about the entertainment aspect of it. We're talking about the business on both sides, UFC and Vince, and why this decision is good for both of them in a lot of different ways. But we've both, you know, we said before, you said, and I agree, before we came on the air, this is something where if once that fight is announced between Cormier and Lesnar, then UFC has to protect its interest. And so contractually, they probably don't allow Brock to be competing in a WWE ring,
right,
as, you know, as champion or otherwise. If that's on the table, once it's slated in that match, then, and plus, keep in mind, for Brock to go, Brock is going to take this match seriously. It's his return to UFC. He's taking it seriously, and he's gonna be training. I mean, he's not going to have the time to work a WWE schedule, and even a part-time see you when I see you schedule that he's used to. He can't work that if he's going to be training for a high-profiled return match. So how long does he keep the title, you know, kind of as a result of all of that? Because to me, we know he's got Survivor Series locked up. I don't know that they want TLC or whatever it is in December to be, you know, that high-profile match between him and Braun Strowman where they get the title. Maybe Rumble, but then you're really pushing it to the timetable of when he's going to have to duck out and start shifting his focus to a real fight against a real fighter that could kick his ass, and probably will, to be honest. But absolutely can if he's not well prepared and trained. And so, what do you see as far as the actual length of time we're going to see Brock Lesnar as Universal Champion? And do you ultimately expect it to be Braun Strowman to beat him?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the natural fit here is Braun Strowman, but, you know, they could be holding off for the WrestleMania win. So, you know, I think it's very possible. And now that I think about it, maybe even more likely that it's not Braun Strowman who takes the title from Lesnar, because where things start to get dicey is looking at the timeline for the UFC fight. As of now, it looks like that fight's going to be taking place either in March or April. That's right around WrestleMania time. Now, what we do know is that Brock Lesnar is, of course, not under an exclusive contract with either WWE or UFC, meaning he is allowed to appear for either promotion while under contract for both promotions. But I would be very willing to guess. I don't know this isn't confirmed, but I would be shocked if UFC would allow Brock Lesnar to wrestle a match after he's signed a fight contract. So Brock Lesnar, was called out by Daniel Cormier over the weekend. All signs absolutely point to that fight. Dana White did the post-fight press conference over the weekend, and he said Daniel Cormier's next fight will very likely be Brock Lesnar. The match is all but confirmed. So I think, as far as Dana White's concerned, he's probably saying, okay, go do your WWE thing now. But as soon as that fight is signed,
right,
as soon as we know, when we lock down that date and the ink is on the paper for, let's say, that fight's taking place on March 30th, then you are not, from the day you begin your UFC training, you are not wrestling in a ring. So the question becomes, when does he start training for a fight like that? I cannot see Brock Lesnar holding the Universal title. If that fight does take place in March or April, I cannot see him holding the Universal title past Royal Rumble. And at that point, who wins? Anyone's guess, is good there. You could see a situation where Braun Strowman enters himself into the Royal Rumble match. He wins the Royal Rumble match to go on and headline WrestleMania. Brock Lesnar drops the title to whoever is in line at that point, a Dean Ambrose, a Drew McIntyre, and then we see Braun Strowman go on to headline WrestleMania 35 for the title against the incumbent champion. But I'll tell you, if the UFC fight is taking place in the spring, I just don't see how Brock Lesnar is going to be able to defend the Universal Championship at WrestleMania 35 and still train for that fight. Unless he's, you just said your words, and I would agree with you, he's going to take that fight seriously.
Oh, sure, he has to.
How much training time does he need? Unless the guy says, I only need 3 weeks to get in shape for this fight, maybe he could do it. Maybe he could defend the Universal Championship at WrestleMania, then at the April pay-per-view in UFC at the end of the month, maybe then he could have the fight. It's possible, but I just don't see how likely it is at this point.
I'm going to go a little different with you, and I understand your reasons. I think Braun has to be the guy to take the title from Brock. Otherwise, I think what happened at Crown Jewel is really going to be a missed opportunity, in the sense that the fans wanted Braun Strowman to win that match.
Sure.
He didn't, and he was dominated. In some ways. Obviously, they found a way to try to protect him, but he was dominated. So to me, Nick, they have to go in the direction of allowing Braun Strowman to get his one-uppance. Now, I do agree with you, or his comeuppance, I guess is the better word. I think I agree with you in the sense that I don't think he makes it to Mania. There has been talks of Brock holding this to Mania because none of the other prior pay-per-views make a lot of sense or look good as far as a place to have him drop it. But if he's only got 2 matches, we know Survivor Series is pretty much done. As far, now he's got a match, and we've got one more to choose from. It could be a TLC. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they want to have time for all of this to kind of marinate and get ready for a huge showdown between these guys. Royal Rumble is one of the big 4 pay-per-views, obviously. And so I think they want that match. That keeps Braun out of the Rumble and gives somebody else an opportunity then to kind of step up and shine, who desperately, we need some more people, whether it's a Dean or a Seth, to kind of get another, kind of spark of momentum going into Mania or something, depending on where they want to go with who they want to go with, a Drew McIntyre, however they want to do it. I would predict, if we're putting it all out there, given the information we have now, Brock Lesnar goes on, he retains, and he's not even on the card at TLC, or is it TLC in December, by the way, as I keep saying that? Is it TLC?
Yeah, the December pay-per-view is TLC.
Okay, so I don't even think he's on the card or competes there.
I would totally agree. That's very typically more or less a throwaway pay-per-view. I mean, they do. WWE does have that luxury of really, after Survivor Series, everything in that company is pretty dead storyline.
It starts gearing up towards
the new year, and we pick up the road to the Royal Rumble.
So I'm going to say he's not even on that, obviously, and I think we go on with Rumble, and I think that's your headline match, with the exception of the Rumble, and maybe a couple other championship matches if they decide to go that way. But I think he drops the title, and I think it would be doing a huge disservice. Not that I'm not complaining about what happened at Crown Jewel and Brock winning in the fashion that he won, but it would do such a big disservice to Braun Strowman if you don't have him defeat Brock Lesnar ultimately. So that's my prediction as we have it now. Unless WWE can find some way to put Brock on the WrestleMania card, and then all bets are off. He could hold that thing until Mania, and then it's Brock Lesnar and Braun Strowman. But given the circumstances in the UFC fight that's inevitable, and the fact that I agree, he's got to train, and UFC won't allow, most likely, contractually him to compete during that time until that fight's over. And also, Vince can't take the risk, Nick. One last little thought on this. Vince cannot take the risk of Brock Lesnar being his champion after that match takes place. The night of or after, Brock cannot be your champion, because what happens if he gets his ass kicked? You think Brock is ready to show up within days or weeks of Mania, and then show up at Mania? Right? Look,
I don't know.
I'm serious, dude.
I really don't think Vince is concerned with that.
He should be.
Look, these things haven't hurt his credibility. Look, we discussed whether or not him being popped for PED use was going to affect his credibility in WWE, true. And it absolutely did not. I really don't. I mean, unless he is absolutely embarrassed in UFC, I really don't. I think he's already established himself enough as a credible MMA fighter, being a multi-time champion in UFC. I don't necessarily know. Look, if he shows up the next day, 2 weeks later, maybe. But look at CM Punk. CM Punk was nothing short of humiliated in 2 fights in UFC. What if he showed up on Raw Monday night? The place would go bananas. No. Everybody would love him.
I agree with that.
Now, that could be because he's spent so much time away. Certainly, if Brock Lesnar is embarrassed and knocked out within 30 seconds or something like that, it would probably only take a month or so for him to disappear before he came back and was fine
but that's
in
a
WWE. And he disappears for that long anyway, even when he is champion in WWE. So, look, I understand what you're saying, but I think it would have to be extreme circumstances for Vince McMahon, at least, to believe that it's damaging his credibility, because I think Vince looks at it as UFC is sport, we're entertainment. Those two things don't matter.
I agree with that. I'm not saying from Vince McMahon's of a credibility issue. I think it's about Brock Lesnar saying, screw you guys, I'm not showing up. I just, because I'm pissed or what. He's had excuses for his last couple of losses on his way out of UFC. He had excuses with health issues. If he's 100% healthy, he has no excuses any longer of folding up and going into a fetal position if he starts getting hit hard like he did those last couple of matches. If he gets embarrassed in UFC, it's just a big risk to have the WWE Championship tied to him for the sake of, injury, whatever, concussion. Who knows? I think there's other reasons, especially if it's going to be held that close to WrestleMania. I just don't know that you can count on him to be at WrestleMania, period, but much less as your Universal Champion. And so another reason why I feel like it's almost guaranteed that he loses and drops the title prior to that build-up and prior to Mania for sure. But moving on from the main event, because we got plenty to discuss here on the show, but that has been the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. All right, and we're back here on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash and Nick Paglino, and want to talk a little bit more of the fallout of Crown Jewel, specifically with Triple H, and what we thought was going to be another main event match at WrestleMania that was pretty much all but guaranteed between Triple H and Batista, and maybe what's going to take place as a result of Triple H's injury that will likely see him miss WrestleMania, barring any type of miraculous recovery. He tweeted a picture of his, I don't know, was it his right pectoral muscle? Yeah. And it just looked nasty. Like, God, it looked nasty. But he's obviously undergoing surgery and will be missing, I guess, what is it, 4 to 6 months, 6 to 8 months, or something pretty substantial, which should take him out of the picture for WrestleMania, most likely. So Nick, real quick, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think this is a huge issue because it obviously hasn't been announced yet. They kind of teased it at SmackDown 1000, but other than that, we haven't really gotten any indication whether that's a done deal or was going to be a done deal. The question that I think really turns to, because it is what it is, Triple H gets injured, you can't really help that. It comes down to Batista, and now, Batista had very specific requests or maybe even more so demands if he was going to return to the WWE and who he wants to work with, Triple H being at the top of that list. And it was also supposed to be, from Batista's account, some sort of kind of last run for him, some last hurrah, come back, work a couple of guys that he wants to, and then be done, and he's out. Now it's, all right, where do we go with Batista from here? There's been talk of maybe a Randy Orton match between the two of them. Maybe that's a guy he will work with. But Nick, we'll probably talk a little bit about Shawn Michaels and his future, in a minute as well, because I think this kind of comes down to one of my biggest issues with the fact that Batista demanded Triple H, demanded only these certain guys that really don't move the needle one way or the other in terms of the future of WWE. And yet here we are in another case. We've talked about Shawn Michaels ad nauseum as far as working with younger guys. And for all intents and purposes at this point, barring, again, him changing his mind, it certainly seems like Shawn Michaels is content with that being his last match, as far as the Crown Jewel tag match that he was in. So here we are with another guy in Batista that doesn't want to really help the company on his way out. He wants to work with guys that would be meaningless matchups, that doesn't do anything for anybody. As a fan, I'm personally fine with him not having anything to do with WrestleMania at this point. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Vince will likely give in or likely decide that he wants Batista there, and he'll be happy to put him in a meaningless match at the end of the day with Randy Orton, unless Randy Orton is eventually going to do something again with one last title run or something before he eventually looks at hanging it up. So what do you make of it? Obviously, the Triple H injury, and then of course how that does alter the plans as of now for WrestleMania, specifically as it relates to Batista.
Yeah, well, I think you hit it right on the head when you said, the Triple H contingency wasn't really much of one, right? Because the match was not announced, so it's not like they now have to scramble to figure out new plans. Certainly if they had it planned, they've got to figure out new plans, but there's no scrambling involved here because, to be honest, it's a nostalgia match.
Sure.
It's not a match, like you said, that's moving the needle of storylines. This isn't a Roman Reigns or a Braun Strowman or a Drew McIntyre or an AJ Styles who's suffering an injury. Now that's forcing actual storyline progress between now and WrestleMania to be interrupted. Triple H exiting storylines right now to have surgery is no big deal, because it's really, their storyline and everything that they were working towards culminated at Crown Jewel. So there was really nothing after that. And, again, like you alluded to, at SmackDown 1000, they never said when a match could take place between Batista and Triple H. So you're right. Let's forget about Triple H. How does this affect Batista? Because, certainly, and I would agree with you, I've always been in agreement in anything from a Batista to whoever wins the Royal Rumble. I'm always in favor of new talent being groomed and new talent being put over. That's why I love when Chris Jericho returns to WWE, because he is a big proponent of putting over new talent and helping groom new talent. So Triple H versus Batista is not anything it's on a big pay-per-view like a WrestleMania. Sure, I'll watch it. Vince McMahon will go for it because, of course, they love to position Triple H as this mega superstar, as this mega draw. And I don't want to take anything away from his star power. But, I think there's somewhat of a convoluted sense of there's a bloatedness, I think, when it comes to what kind of a draw really is Batista versus Triple H at WrestleMania. Obviously, they're going to jump on having Batista at WrestleMania. He's a big movie star. They're going to cash in on the fact that he is right now an A-lister. He's a John Cena. He's The Rock in terms of his popularity in Hollywood. So they're going to jump on that. But it is the Hollywood contingency that could make this difficult for Batista. If Batista doesn't want to work with a Randy Orton, if he doesn't want to work with someone else in WWE, what is his window here? To say that okay, well, so Triple H will miss WrestleMania 35. Okay, well, we'll do the match at WrestleMania 36. Sure. Is Batista going to be available? I mean, this guy is doing movie after movie after movie. He has a very successful, very busy movie career. He may have only carved out time for WrestleMania 35. And after that, it may be impossible for him to do that, because he did say in his interviews, not only does he want to return to have that match with Triple H, but he wants to return for one final full-time run. He wants to do house shows. He wants to do TV. So this isn't going to be a Brock Lesnar deal. This isn't going to be an Undertaker deal where he appears on television 3 or 4 times and then has the match at WrestleMania. He wants a full-time schedule before he hangs it up. Well, with Triple H not being available at WrestleMania 35, has that window just closed? I would have to believe that in light of the situation, Batista will be willing to work with someone else.
Sure.
It just becomes a matter of who it is. Yeah, like you said, Randy Orton probably makes the most sense from an evolution standpoint. But that's not to say it couldn't be somebody else. That's not to say Batista could come back and Batista could, hey, would fans like to see a situation where, let's throw this out there, Batista comes back, Batista says, I want my final run. I wanted Triple H, but we know that Triple H is on the shelf now with a surgery. So I am calling out that WWE locker room. Anyone that wants to face me at WrestleMania 35, come out. Daniel Bryan's music hits. Maybe Daniel Bryan comes out. Maybe they rekindle some kind of that feud that they had the last time, where Daniel Bryan comes out and says, hey, you stole my spotlight once before. You're not going to do it again. You're an old timer. You're a has-been. I'll put you on the shelf at WrestleMania 35. I could potentially see something like that happen, where that could be a high-profile match. Daniel Bryan gets the win and Batista is out. But certainly, I would love to see him face a future talent, an up-and-comer talent, as opposed to a Randy Orton, because, it's just a throwaway match. But we've got to remember, the mindset of a Vince McMahon, the mindset of WWE will be Randy Orton, Batista. That's marquee. That's must-see. That's something people really want to see because of the value of those guys. But, hey, I will say this. Randy Orton's a better choice than a Triple H, don't you think?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think he is. And I think it's a bit contradicting in what Batista says and what he says he wants and what is ultimately the reality of it all. I feel like it's one thing for him to say, I've got this list of guys that I want to work with and only them. But then it's also another thing for him to say, I want one full-time run. I'm not talking, I want house shows. I want the whole 9 yards, because it seems like maybe he said this last time around. I can't recall specifically, but it seems like that's kind of what we expected with the last time. But of course, the whole Daniel Bryan situation, and I feel like Batista has to get over the fact that he can predict what type of return and reception he's going to receive from the WWE universe. I feel like last time around he was real disappointed in the reaction of the fans, where he came back and he was a pretty over baby face, and then because the fans were so on the side of Daniel Bryan, and once it became pretty evident that Batista was going to kind of take his spot in the Rumble and, of course, Mania, it became a huge issue that I don't think Batista saw coming. And I'm not going to say he got all up in his feels and got sensitive over it, but it certainly felt that way. I remember writing a column back around that time where he was at the Hall of Fame, and he had a promo, somewhat of a promo, And he was great because he was just himself. But you could tell some of the things that he said certainly seemed to indicate that he I'm not going to say he wasn't okay, but Batista definitely got a little sensitive toward the reaction of the crowd. I think he wanted to remain a babyface. I think that's where he felt comfortable coming back. He wanted that warm reception that The Rock always gets, and he got it at first. But then the fans turned on him pretty quickly because they wanted Daniel Bryan in that spot, and they felt like he was taking it from somebody with kind of that future, whereas he didn't really have one. That's going to be the same case here.
I don't know about that.
Well, here's the thing. I'm worried that, look, after SmackDown 1000, that reception was huge. You could tell he was feeding off the crowd. He was playing into their hands. He was playing up the fact that they were really into the exchange. And then, of course, he also loved the fact that they loved the little soundbite at the end, but you haven't beaten me or whatever it was. And I feel like he's going to use that as some sort of reasoning and justification of coming back, working that match with Triple H, which now will need to be changed. If he thinks that he can predict every aspect of his return, especially one that's full-time, where he's going to be in the main event picture on a regular basis, or he might have a title run in there somewhere, he's likely going to work as a heel. And I'm not, again, I don't know Batista. He might be prepared for that better this time around. But Nick, it really certainly felt like he had an issue the last time when the fans didn't react the way that he wanted. And I think that's a big part of it. I think that's why this time he takes some time off and comes back with an actual list of demands and says, if I'm going to put myself through this one way or the other, this is what I want. I have no problem with Batista. I think he's a good star. I think he's over, but he's not always over in the way that he wants to be, and therefore it kind of, pisses him off somewhere deep down. And
I think he's a really passionate guy.
True.
Even when he cut that promo at SmackDown 1000, remember he said, any of you that know me well know this is the last place I want to be, holding a live microphone in front of the crowd. I think he gets nervous about that. And it's funny because he's an actor, and he's a good actor. But,
right.
Some of the best actors, even like Robert De Niro said it a million times, he's not a good public speaker. They still feel uncomfortable, speaking in front of large groups live. So,
right.
And I think part of it, too, is that he is a very passionate person. And I think he's always wanted the acceptance of the WWE
and the
universe.
The respect. Yeah.
And the respect, And I think for a guy like him that has been good in the ring, limited. He's a big man, obviously not the best wrestler in the world, but a good talker, a good character. He's been a good muscle figure, has a great look. I think he's gotten the respect that he deserves, and I think he knows that. And I think what happened with Daniel Bryan was him just being a victim of circumstance. He was in the wrong place at the very wrong time. And, as far as you saying him presenting a list of demands, I don't necessarily know that he's ever said, I won't work with anyone else. I think he's just always said, what I would like is that final match or that final feud to be against Triple H. So we don't really know to what extent he would be comfortable working with an AJ Styles if he had to, but I think the plan that WWE had for him, which was bringing him back in this major main event role to win the Royal Rumble match and go on to headline WrestleMania, that was something that at that time, at that place, the fans, the WWE universe did not want to see. And I think WWE's probably learned from that mistake, and they probably know a better role for Batista this time around. And I think if he came back, even if it was leading up to a match with Triple H at WrestleMania, I don't think there would be plans for him to win the Royal Rumble. Maybe he would come in, maybe he would enter the match. It might be cool to see him in the Royal Rumble, but I think the reaction would be very different this time around, depending on the plan that they have in place for him. If they utilize him in a match with a Randy Orton or even with an up-and-comer, maybe an Elias, depending on whether or not he's going to be the babyface or the heel. Obviously, if he's working with Triple H, he's going to be the babyface, but maybe he doesn't have a problem being a heel, So I think maybe to a certain extent you're being a little tough on him, and in judging the demands that he might have, when we don't really know for sure he does have those demands. But I think you are right in maybe he is being so careful in his planning to come back because he doesn't want to end up in that situation. See, here's the thing though. That was a situation where he came back under the certain expectation he was going to be this top baby face, and the fans just completely revolted. They completely rejected it. If he came back knowing, all right, I'm coming back as a heel, I'm going to come back and I'm challenging Daniel Bryan, or I'm challenging
I'm not
AJ
sure
Styles, or I'm challenging a top babyface to play the heel role, then he gets that reaction. I think he would then understand, that's the reaction I'm supposed to be getting. I think he was just really surprised by the reaction that he got in light of Daniel Bryan being the fan favorite at that time.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think that's the problem. I think that's the reason why he says, let me work with a guy like Triple H, because then it does change. It's like, hey, I'm not getting over against the Daniel Bryans, the AJ Styles, and all these young guys.
Right.
But there's a reason for that, Batista. And here's the problem that I find with WWE accepting, maybe they're not demands, but at the end of the day, they're accepting these types of situations because they need to look to the future. And right now, it just feels like there's still this group of guys that's stuck in the past. It's like Batista's only self-serving in this sense. Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, Kane, Triple H, now Batista added to that mix. And I don't really include Randy Orton there because he's still more of an active, full-timer than any of the rest. So I can't put him in that category, but he's getting dangerously close. And it's like this clique, no pun intended, of guys from back then where they were the big stars, not accepting the fact that the business is moving on without them. And so then you've got Batista coming back saying, all right, well, what protects me the most? What puts me in a situation that I'm just going to come back and have fun? Well, let me go work with my friends. Awesome. That's great. And I think your mic is messed up.
Oh, there we go. You got me now?
Yeah, there we go.
And then to add to that, I think this other notion that, and again, I always want to add this disclaimer that I love Triple H. I think he's one of the greats, but I think Triple H puts himself on that level of the HBKs and the Undertakers and the major top stars in the company, the John Cenas. And I don't think Triple H has ever been that guy. Triple H has never been the top guy in WWE and in pro wrestling
he had
in general.
3 or 4 year
I
stretch.
Think because the role that he's in right now, and because he is buddies with the Shawn Michaels, the guys like the Shawn Michaels, that I think he assumes he is on that level, just like the way Stephanie McMahon assumes she's part of the women's revolution, even though she really is not, because they're that authority figure that they actually are in WWE has sort of gotten to their heads, so.
No, I agree.
So I think, again, they may look at that as, and Vince may look at that as, this is a marquee match. This is a main event match, when really maybe it isn't such a marquee match. Maybe it isn't such a main event match. Maybe Vince and Triple H have it in their head that, Batista's a Hollywood actor now.
Right.
So when he comes back to WWE, he's going to get the Hollywood actor treatment and everybody's going to love him. Well, we've seen what happens. Yeah. We've seen what happens when The Rock comes back and he's a top Hollywood guy. And guess what? The fans say, we're not having it. We're not buying it.
That's true.
You bailed on us to go do your thing. We're not going to give you that. We're not going to treat you like celebrities. We're not going to roll that red carpet out for you.
Yeah.
So, there could be some truth to that there, where they believe that the level that they are at, especially now, is a lot higher than where they were at maybe 15 years ago, or maybe where they ever were at, But that's not to say, though, that a guy like a Batista doesn't have worth in coming back to WWE, having that last run, and having a big-time match against someone young that he could really put over. I'll be honest with you, man, and I can rack my brain. We can talk more about this as the weeks come up, and the months come up, and we get closer to WrestleMania, and we've had time to think about it. But right off the top of my head, I really wouldn't mind a Daniel Bryan versus Batista feud. Now, I know I'd be in the minority there.
I wouldn't
and
mind
I know a lot of people will probably hate that idea, but they've got that past. They have that history. I don't think I would mind seeing that, but you're probably right. If we do see Batista come back, it's probably going to be in a babyface role. And I think if done right, the fans will accept him back as that baby.
Well, and on the opposite, I mean, most likely it's going to be Randy Orton, at least in the beginning, especially
Right.
for a WrestleMania deal. So we will keep up with that, obviously. A couple of things that I want to get into real quick before we start wrapping up, Nick. We got to address Shane McMahon winning the World Cup at Crown Jewel. Nick, I don't know if did you read? There was a couple of reports that I saw on this that I thought was interesting, and one of them was, I guess, Shane McMahon's wife is a producer or something along those lines, and I guess I read an article where it was just ironic that Shane McMahon was holding that trophy up on that show, and the reason being is, and I'm not saying that there weren't other circumstances, that maybe that wasn't the original plan. I'm not really positive. Has it been? Well, real quick, just has it been determined whether that was a real legit injury with Miz, or was that fake?
No, the plan all along was for Shane McMahon to win the World Cup.
Well, so apparently there was this article that I read that Shane's wife is some form of producer, director, or something, and has a movie out. I think that she's essentially in control of. I mean, so she's a high end, whether she's a writer or director or producer or whatever. She's pretty up there on the list of credits for this particular movie. And it just got released in New York, I think, and Los Angeles as of the weekend of Crown Jewel this past weekend. And then I think in a couple of weeks it's going to go nationwide or something. And I don't know the name of it. I haven't really looked into the actual movie. But the premise of the movie, Nick, is I think maybe an American journalist being killed by a foreign country. And so a little interesting in the sense that Shane McMahon, of all people, the one that has maybe the most to gain personally, kind of exploiting a very controversial situation, is running around on the show paid for by a man accused of and most likely involved with the brutal murder of an American journalist, basically. And here is Shane McMahon, whose wife has a movie basically around the same type of scenario, and he's hoisting this trophy, running around and slapping hands with people in robes, and it was.
I don't think Crown Jewel could have been pulled off without some horrible moment of irony.
No kidding.
Place. During the event,
and just real quick
with all the controversy surrounding the event taking place in the first place.
Look, man, there's been a lot of other things that have come out that we haven't had the chance to talk about, and there's so many things. There's a couple of major issues I want to get into at some point, but I mean, it's like WWE went into this thing, and there was some changes. You could tell they changed some things up this time around. It wasn't full of propaganda for Saudi Arabia. There were some things that changed this time around on Crown Jewel. Amidst the controversy surrounding the event all in and of itself. But I don't think WWE ultimately cared. I think Vince looks at this and decided, look, we're going in all the way. We're going to take the heat. We don't even, I bet he probably knows that the majority of his fan base don't care about this situation as much as others do. And he decides to go there. And more irony maybe to boot here, you bring a returning Hulk Hogan back at this point, who got washed away and erased from WWE for a period of time because of some racist comments that he made on tape. And yet here we are now. They're like, we know this is a controversial event in and of itself without the addition of Hulk Hogan, but let's not worry about it. Let's bring Hulk Hogan out at the opening of this show and give two middle fingers to any politically correct punk that's deciding what that tries to dictate what we do with our company. And I'm not saying that was the reason behind Hulk being on this show, but it really was funny to me when you see Hulk Hogan, which it was announced ahead of time, so we kind of expected it, but you see Hulk Hogan open that up. And anyway, I don't want to get too far off the deep end here as far as the discussion at hand, but Shane McMahon, without all the political caveats that are involved there, Nick. What did you think of this, which seems to be setting up a clear heel turn for Shane McMahon?
Yeah, look, I think as far as the tournament goes, it downplays a lot of the involvement that some of those guys could have had in the tournament. I can understand to a certain extent the fans who were critical of, nothing slaps a tournament and its participants in the face more than some kind of a lame screwball finish like that. So, the execution of it maybe wasn't the best thing in the world, but I will say that McMahon's always work best when they're heels, and it seems as if the long-term plan that is in place right now is for Shane McMahon to become a heel as WWE SmackDown gets closer and closer to making the move to Fox in 2019, which is basically in about a year they're going to be making that move. And WWE, with the current stagnant ratings, the reports that have surfaced since Crown Jewel are suggesting that WWE feels ultimately it makes more sense to have Shane McMahon as a heel. It's a storyline that has worked in the past. It's a storyline that should work again in the future. Certainly right now on the SmackDown side of things, you have a babyface general manager in Paige, and you have a babyface commissioner in Shane McMahon. So having one of them be a heel, we haven't seen Shane McMahon as a heel in a long time. I think WWE just feels like it makes more long-term sense. And to be honest with you, I think I agree. Look, man, there is no version of the McMahons that we haven't seen before. Stephanie and Shane getting along. Stephanie and Shane hate each other.
Right.
Vince and all three of them, Vince, Stephanie, Shane, if you want to even include Linda, they all get along. They all hate each other. We have seen every version of them being baby faces and heels. So yes, It's always going to feel redundant because we've seen it before, but we haven't seen this version in a long time. And if WWE SmackDown heads into Fox with the evil Shane McMahon in control of the show, maybe that will help freshen things up. Maybe it will help freshen things up for SmackDown now, leading up to that move in 2019. So while people might argue, and I may even agree with them, that turning Shane McMahon is not the answer to your SmackDown woes. You're not going to see SmackDown numbers start rapidly rising because Shane McMahon is a heel. It's at least a fresher direction to go in if you're going to hold on to the played out authority storyline that they have going on with Raw and SmackDown right now.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think Shane, I didn't look at the World Cup as being that meaningful to begin with. Now,
but clearly it wasn't based on what we saw.
However, as it started getting going and as it got throughout the night, and then you see a guy like Dolph Ziggler at the end of it, and a guy like The Miz at the end of it. Although I did have, I didn't have those two guys. I thought it was kind of a unique combination. I thought Seth Rollins would actually go to the end, and maybe The Miz would win. I thought, look. They might be looking at this as kind of the umbrella effect that Shane McMahon getting this heel rub in a pretty meaningless tournament altogether and being able to call himself the best in the world and turning himself heel. Like, they may look at this now as an opportunity of how many people can it affect in a good way. Shane McMahon as a massive heel, which he will now probably be, and he'll do great at it. Will be able to help other stars more than if let's say a Miz had won that, or a Dolph Ziggler had necessarily won that, and the amount of people that tournament can help is kind of contained to the winner, in a Dolph or a Miz or whatever. And so maybe they're looking at it like, yes, we're going to piss some people off, but hey, the tournament didn't really mean anything to begin with. And B, yes, the Miz could have elevated his career if needed a little bit by saying he's the best in the world and having the trophy. Dolph Ziggler could have certainly at this point, I felt like, used it more once he got there to the end. And of course, the promo that he had prior to that finals match I thought was great. I mean, I really thought, I just think Dolph Ziggler is so good in any position. And he's always fighting that uphill battle. I think he would have, while he's about to start getting a little lost on Raw, I think going forward, he just lost to Elias this week. I just think Dolph could have used it, but I always think Dolph could use that type of stuff. And so I think the way they're looking at this, though, is that Shane could use this more to help more people on SmackDown, especially as you mentioned, as they start using this next year to get ready for their transition over to Fox. And so I'm not going to bitch about it at this point. I think it was fine. I'm going to bitch only in the sense of being a huge Dolph mark and wishing that he could stay relevant. And I just feel like he's on the verge of going right back down to being irrelevant again. But that's my thought, and so we will keep up with this.
I think I would agree with you more if I really saw that trajectory for Dolph right now. But I think they're still doing a pretty damn good job of keeping Dolph relevant.
They are so far.
Great stuff on Raw every week, and then let's just add to the mix. Shane's a wrestler. So, anytime you've got that authority figure that can get in the ring, Stephanie doesn't get in the ring. Paige, of course, can't get in the ring. Baron Corbin, one of the reasons why I advocated, that move to him being GM is because he can still wrestle. Wish he would do it without the vest. That's not to say that, I'm advocating a shirtless Baron Corbin, but for the love of God, I mean, it's like,
well, but let's also
like a bald Bon Jovi.
Let's also talk about the difference, though. Let's talk about the difference between a Baron Corbin and a Shane McMahon. Shane McMahon might be a wrestler, but I don't look at him so much as a technical wrestler. He's a guy that has spots, and those spots go over better as a babyface. And so it is interesting timing because normally when Shane is as involved as he is right now, and he gets involved in a WrestleMania match of some kind, he's normally coming off the babyface because he's the one putting his body through hell, and that's really the way he gets over in matches. Baron Corbin's a completely different animal. He works as a heel, even though he gets active and wrestles because he's a true wrestler and he can work a heel, a heel way in the ring. Whereas I do find that a little bit something they're going to have to navigate because, yes, Shane can wrestle, but I don't think they're looking at it this way. I don't think they're seeing Shane as getting in the ring very often, and if he does, it's going to be a Mania match. And
I wasn't suggesting that it would be a week-to-week thing, but he is at least in a position where he can get in the ring.
Right.
And I think he can help put over a baby face, and we have seen him working as a heel before, still putting his body on the line and still taking those risks. I think he can do that. We can still see some big matchups out of him at bigger pay-per-views, like potentially a Royal Rumble. He may enter the Royal Rumble. We'll obviously probably see a bigger marquee match at WrestleMania. I could Daniel Bryan's another guy that I could see him work with, even if this is setting up some kind of maybe a baby face turn for the Miz, because you're definitely going to see Shane in the coming weeks running around now saying he's the best in the world. He's the best in the world because he won. Maybe this could set up a good future long-term baby face turn for a guy like the Miz. In fact, that's what I thought when I saw Ziggler Miz in the finals. I said, is this going to be some kind of a babyface turn for maybe either Ziggler or maybe the Miz? Because we've seen the Miz as a heel for so long. Maybe this could set that up. I'm intrigued by the possibilities of who Shane McMahon could work with. Kevin Owens, when Kevin Owens comes back from surgery.
Yeah, sure.
He could come back to SmackDown, pick up as a big baby face facing his nemesis, Shane McMahon. So I like the possibilities that this opens up, and I think Shane McMahon is at least solid enough and consistent enough in the ring where he could really be in a position to put over a big-time babyface or assist in a big-time heel to babyface turn.
I agree with you. I think that's also, before we get out of here, I want to change gears real quick because I meant to ask about this prior to us coming on the show, and so of course, Nick, you and I didn't prep for this conversation, and I know we're running out of time, and so I just we might have to shelf this for next week. But I read, I read an intro. I've got a project that I'm working on in the wrestling business, a new project, a new gimmick that we're going to try to debut here soon, that the Voice of Wrestling is hopefully going to be a part of as well. And so I'll make those announcements very soon. But as such, because of this project, it kind of had me researching some things and looking up some stuff for some particular articles and everything. And one of the things that I came across, Nick, that I found very interesting, if you were to guess right now, Nick, if I were to put you on the spot and guess what you think the median age or the average age for the WWE fan right now is currently, like what would you guess?
Is the average age of a WWE fan?
Yeah, like statistically, demographic, what is the actual median age for WWE fans?
22, 23?
So, apparently in 2006, it was 33 or something along those lines. In 2016, the last census, kind of statistic that I found, the last deal that I actually saw, in 2016, just a couple of years ago, and 10 years later, it's like 54.
Whoa.
It is 50 plus, the average age.
The average age.
Now, I don't know what pops into your head when you hear that stat. Surprise and shock and belief. I get disbelief. I get all of that as far as the things, the kind of the emotions you might feel. But the stuff that then starts really popping into my head is the format of the show and the fact that whatever WWE's doing, and they've had ample amount of time, Nick, to see if this is going to be a success or not. If their entire product overall, with very few exceptions here and there, caters to children and to women overall. Like that's what they're trying. That's the demographic they really want to try to reach, because they feel like the men just kind of come and go as they come and go, and they need to put their time in developing the kids that are going to become fans and stuff. It really appears, which is why we're kind of going back to the Batista conversation and all this stuff, that maybe there's the demographic, the actual WWE universe, the bulk of them, are going to be all over a Triple H Batista match or a Randy Orton,
sure,
because it clearly seems to indicate that the Attitude Era, the 90s, that, when people our age and a little older, Nick, they've stuck around and have went through and through, but the new fans that WWE's been trying to reach clearly can't be that successful in it for that average age, if that's the truth. And I saw it from several different sources. This is not something that I'm pulling out of, go look it up. Go look up the average age for a WWE viewer, and it shows 50 plus. 50 years of age or older. It's crazy. Wow. Like 54 or 56 or something incredible like that. And so I guess my question, Nick, and again, we can probably dive into this a little bit more in depth at some other point, but just real quick, your initial thoughts in the sense that it seems like if WWE were going to be having success doing what they're doing, catering their product to the way where it makes you and I just literally have to just digest so much crap, just put it all to the side, the New Day and all this crap they do in between their 2 to 3 hours of programming on each show every week, and we just have to kind of just laugh it off and be like, yeah, sometimes it's tough to be a wrestling fan, but the other stuff kind of makes up for it, I understood their reasoning for PG, understood their reasoning for kind of changing up their target audience. But if it's not working, Nick, at some point, don't you have to consider that? And that doesn't even seem to be a talking point. The fact that they literally have been for how long now, 10, 15 years, been trying to cater to this younger audience, and yet it clearly seems to be not working. And so your initial thoughts on that?
I'll tell you what, Chris, and again, we can let this marinate a little bit and talk a little bit about it more.
That's crazy. It's a crazy number.
What it is, and listen, what is, when you asked, what does it initially make me think? Well, let's go back to the concept of SmackDown potentially becoming more of a sports-oriented show.
Yeah.
When it switches over to Fox.
Yep.
Who is more open to watch the New Day throwing pancakes?
Right.
Children
Yep.
or 50-year-olds?
Right.
Who is more open to watching a sports-oriented product, who maybe is already watching football? You know, your parents, your uncles, your grandparents even, they're all watching football. They're all still watching Thursday night football, Monday night football. They're all rooting for their teams. You know, even those games that are airing at 8 o'clock, the late night games and the Monday night football games, they're watching them. So will they be more inclined? You know, I'm not saying, and don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying a 50-year-old won't get into the New Day. I'm not saying younger fans don't watch sports, but I feel like an 8-year-old is going to be much more entertained by Bailey hugging people, and you know, New Day throwing pancakes, and the jokes and the childish behavior from some of the characters. They're going to be much more into that than they would be a Daniel Cormier hosted sports-oriented pro wrestling show. Because I have never had a conversation with anyone, you know, I'm 40 years old. I've never had a conversation with a younger fan who maybe in, you know, and that's not like I talk to a lot of fans in their teens, but I know fans that are maybe in their 20s, even in their early 30s. They're not, for those fans, you know, that maybe have tuned out, it's because as they get older, they don't want to see the ridiculous comedy anymore. They don't want to see that stuff anymore. Right. And when I'm talking to those fans, I never have conversations with those fans about old school wrestling. When I talk to fans that want to bring up the days of the Ricky Steamboats and the Ric Flairs and the NWA and even going way back to the Nick Bockwinkel's and the Bruno Sammartinos, those are older fans. And that's when wrestling was presented as more of a sport, and you didn't see the silliness and the comedy. So the median age is 50s. Maybe that's one of the reasons why SmackDown might be moving toward that professional sports presentation, because it's an older fan. It's an older fan that is going to appreciate that more than a younger fan.
We'll need to shelf that, talk a little bit more, maybe bring a guest on to discuss.
Extremely interesting,
because it shocked me. Like I was blown. I would have thought at the top end of the spectrum, 35. You know, something along those lines. I really figured because of the
like you said, the median age. You know, I'd go. You know, if it's 10 years old at the bottom and it's maybe 40 years old at the top, then okay, 25-ish, you know what I mean? Mid-20s maybe.
Right. And you're thinking after everything they've done for the past 10 years, 15 years of programming, it really seems like that would have started skewing downwards, and it's just, I was blown away.
Well, Chris, you know, another thing to think about, and again, I know we could talk about this for another hour, but as the ratings for shows decline, who is that fan base that's still there? Maybe it's that fan base. Maybe it is that 50-year-old that has been watching WWE for the past 30 years.
Right, when it was good.
20 years old, and that's who they're whittling down to as shows like Raw and SmackDown continue to lose viewers on almost a steady basis. Maybe those are the people who are still tuning in, you know?
Right. They remember when wrestling was at its best, and so it takes a while to let it go. Whereas
it certainly doesn't seem like that's what the fans look like when I see them on television. It doesn't look like those are the fans that are in attendance. But you know, and when I go to a lot of live events, you know, I'm not seeing a predominant 50-year-old demographic. I'm seeing a lot of people my age with children.
Right, but Nick, when you consider,
I see a pretty broad demographic.
When you consider though the age of people that would have to be there to bring the median up to an average, like a median age of 50 something. Most of them bitches are on canes and can't walk anywhere.
Right. You would see people rolling around in wheelchairs. You know, they'd be carrying their title belts around they'd have a title belt wrapped around their oxygen tank. I get it.
So it would be tough to see. I don't think what we see on in the TV in the live audience is going to necessarily be a good indication. But
the day I see a 93-year-old wearing a DX T-shirt and crotch chopping their diapers, that.
We will talk about that more. We'll bring on a guest next week, and we got some other things, of course. Gail Kim came out, called WWE just flat out racist. We'll see if there's some merit there. And again, Hulk Hogan, we don't know exactly what they're going to do with him, if that was just kind of a one-off deal for Crown Jewel. But it was an interesting choice, and there has been some criticism of bringing him back, period, at all. We'll talk a little bit about that next week. And then, of course, Survivor Series will be coming up, so we'll have plenty to discuss next week in preparation for that event. But until then, he is Nick Paglino. I am Chris Cash. We appreciate you joining us on this week's edition of The Voice of Wrestling.